I was originally going to release this episode at the end of last year. However, it was just too good not to share it during Black History Month. At this moment in our country's history, while some people are actively trying to hide the past and scrub the memory of the past from our national conscience, people like my friend Andre are not only preserving it, they're shining a light on it. Andre is literally helping Black people learn their own personal family history with his new venture. I'm glad he made time to talk about it. And with that, let's get into it. I want to welcome a longtime friend to the podcast. Andre, welcome.
Thank you.
Andre, as I always do, I like to start by asking you to introduce yourself to our listeners. So can you go ahead and do that?
Sure. I'm Andre Kearns. I'm a Washington, D.C. native. I'm a husband. In fact, my wife and I celebrate 25 years of marriage in September. I'm a father to two amazing sons. So my oldest son just graduated, earned his degree in astrophysics from the University of Virginia. And then we just moved our youngest son into college at the Mecca, Howard University, where he's studying finance. From an education and profession perspective, I'm a proud Morehouse man, a member of the legendary class of 1994. And in fact, I'm the fifth generation of my family to attend an HBCU. And
Wow.
then I went on to earn my MBA from Harvard Business School. I've spent my career as a marketing leader, mostly in the technology world. So my first job in tech was with America Online. And
Wow.
then that led to a series of executive marketing roles for mainly tech startups and private equity backed technology companies. And most recently, I spent the last 5 years as marketing director at Amazon Web Services, launching and growing businesses. So last year I left AWS and I found myself in career transition and really at an inflection point. And so now I'm embracing that and I'm in a pivot moment and an opportunity for reinvention. And so I've started a new venture, Black Ancestries, which we'll talk about throughout this podcast. But really, it's a blending of my professional expertise, driving go-to-market strategies with my personal passion as a genealogist. And so I'm using the expertise I've built in both those realms to scale this new venture, which is it's a genealogy research services company that helps people of African descent to uncover roots, celebrate heritage, and preserve legacy.
I can't wait to get into all of that. But before we do, I just want to ask your perspective how we know each other.
I think that the easiest way to answer that is Bain and Company. And in particular, through Blacks at Bain, we were both part of that inaugural group. And I remember that first meeting we had in Chicago.
In Chicago, I had been like at the firm for 2 or 3 months, and I was like, look at all these people here. This is amazing.
Yeah, and I mean, Bain was a special time in my life and a special opportunity for me. And at the time that we're talking about, there weren't a lot of African Americans in the sector or in the company. And so, but you did have consulting firms like Bain who were just starting to cast their net a bit wider to look for diverse talent and look for it at places like HBCUs, like Morehouse, where I attended, and Spelman and Howard. And so there weren't that many of us when I started at Bain in the Boston office. I think in my starting AC class, there were maybe 5 or 6 of us,
Mm-hmm.
half from HBCUs, half from PWIs. Certainly no Black partners when I started, only a few Black managers. In fact, I remember one of those managers always enjoyed telling a story about how someone at the firm, when he was walking down the hall, had mistaken him for a guy who worked in the mailroom.
Oh,
So
God.
that was interesting. But listen, fast forward to now, and it's just amazing to see folks like you, Keith, and others who have remained at Bain for so long, built careers, have been promoted to partner, and now you are growing Babs into what it is today. And profiles like yours around creating inclusive environments, we need to be sharing that out there in the public space, since it does feel like we're moving backwards in terms of inclusion. and in terms of commitment as companies to make opportunities more accessible to all people. So, and I grew up in a household with college educated parents, but my father was a minister, my mom was a teacher.
Hmm.
And so when I was in college, I knew nothing about opportunities in strategy consulting or investment banking, right? So it really took concerted efforts from Bain and other companies and organizations like SEO to really recruit at Morehouse, make students like me aware of professional opportunities in consulting so that we could go for it. And so I know today there are others like me. And so I really just hope that companies see what Bain's been able to achieve and continue to commit themselves to cast the net wide, to have the opportunity to catch the top talent from places maybe they would not otherwise expect to look.
Completely agree. And in my role now in my day job, when I'm not podcasting on the side, that's a big part of what we're thinking about so that we can make sure we get the best talent. I will say, I remember meeting you my first year at the firm. You and Herm, I think, did an experience sharing presentation during that first conference about your time in South Africa.
Yes.
And aside from the fact that third year analysts, third year associate consultants, SACs, we call them, senior associate consultants, were like seniors in high school when you're a freshman. Like, I remember you and Herm were like, that's where I'm trying to be one day. And I remember thinking, oh my goodness, like they went to Joburg. And the only thing I remember taking away from your presentation is that you all rolled a rental car and somehow successfully drove it back to the rental car place.
Yeah.
And
There, we had quite a few adventures in South Africa.
I'm not sure what the
I don't like to
takeaway
think
was.
too hard about some of them.
And I think we'll just
I'm
leave it
just glad
there.
I survived. Again, it was just special. It was a special time in my life. That was the first time that I'd gone abroad, had lived abroad. I'd not traveled abroad through college, so this was a amazing experience for me. There were a bunch of us from around the world who made up the team in this startup South Africa office. We were all around the same age, and we were interested in working hard, but also exploring all that Southern Africa had to
Mm-hmm.
offer. And so we would work like crazy during the week, and then we would travel to many places over the weekends, and it was an incredible experience. And I would also say, and we'll get into this in a bit, but I've always had a longing to better understand my connection to Africa and my African ancestry. And so being able to live in South Africa for close to a year is very connected to that longing that I had. And so when I arrived, I was just a voracious consumer of the culture, and I wanted to know everything that I could about South African culture and all the different ethnic groups and tribes in South Africa. It was a magical time because you had Mandela, who was
Mm-hmm.
the president, and Truth and Reconciliation hearings. So you're seeing the country being transformed and led by a black government. And so it was just amazing. It was a special time that I'll always carry with me.
When we talk about being at home among the ancestors, I want to start by understanding your first taste of being a genealogist. We had Brother Murdoch on recently talking about his home being on horseback, and he talked about his first time riding a horse, and he was like, I was bitten by the bug. Like, I did it once and was like, this is where I belong. Did you have that same type of experience? What was your first taste of genealogy or being a genealogist? What was that like?
Yeah, I think my first taste was back in 2006, and we were having a Kearns family reunion. My father's from, and his family's from Charlotte, North Carolina. So we were having our family reunion in Charlotte, and I was asked to create a family tree. So I registered on ancestry.com and started building the tree out back then. That experience just kind of got me hooked on researching my family and building this tree out. The thing with Ancestry is they brought a lot of innovation to researching your family history. So it's an online platform where you can build your tree out, and it makes it shareable to others. So you can share your tree with others, and then you can access other people's tree to help you build yours out.
Mm-hmm.
They've also built out a database by digitizing millions and millions of state, local, federal documents that record the lives of billions of deceased persons.
Mm-hmm.
And they make those documents available and discoverable. And that just makes research a whole lot easier. So, really, all you need to do a lot of in depth research today is internet access and a laptop. So, I would say that was my first taste. And so, my tree started as a few hundred people, and now I checked it before, we did this podcast, and I have over 15,000 people
Oh my
in my
gosh.
family tree now. So,
Oh
yeah.
my gosh. And you said that that was in 2006 for a family reunion, but had you gotten little glimpses into what this could look like or what a tree could look like from other experiences prior to 2006? Because you were kind of you were an adult in 2006. So,
Yes,
were there
exactly.
experiences earlier where you kind of got curious and started thinking about this stuff?
Absolutely. I think that first, I've always been a student of history. I've always enjoyed studying history. And genealogy and family history is history personalized to your family and individuals within your family. And then I would also say I remember growing up watching the miniseries Roots,
Mm-hmm.
and I just always remember that miniseries, and I remember feeling inspired that Alex Haley was able to trace his roots back to named ancestors on the continent of Africa through slavery. And so I didn't know it at the time when I was watching it, but it really planted a seed in me that has grown into a full blown passion to trace my roots and to try to trace connections back to the continent of Africa. And it's led to experiences like the one I mentioned before, where I've sought out opportunities to travel and live on
Mm-hmm.
the continent of Africa. I think that's another expression of my desire to explore that connection, that ancestral connection. That was a seed planted on the positive front. But then I also remember in school assignments and exercises where I felt like I came away where my ancestors and my own family origins weren't really acknowledged.
Mm-hmm.
So, for example, I remember a middle school geography assignment, and the assignment was to color in a map of a New York City set of boroughs with different ethnic enclaves at the turn of the 20th century. And so when I went to start to build my own map and I began to shade in all these neighborhoods, I created a Black neighborhood. And my teacher basically told me, no, I need you to focus on the European immigrant communities, the Irish, the Greek, the Italian. And so I kind of, coming out of that, said, okay, but where are we in this?
Right.
That's a question that has motivated me to find where we are, where my ancestors came from, and where we came to, and the history that we built.
It is interesting how much of the history of different parts, especially New York City, are literally buried in the history books. I was listening to a podcast maybe a year ago, and they were talking about Seneca Village, which was a Black community in the middle of Manhattan. And they were like,
Wow.
yeah, y'all got to go. We're building Central Park. And they just literally just leveled the community and put in Central Park. And we don't talk about Seneca Village. We don't talk about a lot of places similar to that that are a part of history and are just ignored as if the people there never existed.
Yeah. Sadly, that's a great, poignant example of that. Sadly, you read many examples, particularly pertaining to, it seems like, burial grounds
Yes.
of people of African descent, where those burial grounds are not respected and they're built over. Once they're built over, for the most part, that history is lost,
Right.
which is sad. I read recently about Hilton Head was originally inhabited by the Gullah Geechee communities,
Mm-hmm.
who have a very rich culture. But as Hilton Head grew as a tourist destination, the Gullah Geechee have been squeezed out
Right.
to the point where there are these very rich neighborhoods, that gated communities that lock out the Gullah Geechee from being able to visit the cemeteries where their ancestors are buried. I think that story was a feature in the New York Times a couple of weeks ago. It's just difficult to read these things.
Yeah. And for people who are regular listeners, they'll know that by the time this podcast is published, I will have told a story about my church's 1619 pilgrimage to that part of the country. We spent a
Wow.
week in Charleston, but my wife and I decided to do Hilton Head and Savannah on either sides of that and take in the history there. So I look forward to people's reactions to that and comments and feedback. Andre, while we're on this topic, we talked about your first taste of being a genealogist, which leads to the second question I always ask is when did you decide to make it your home and create a new venture? I'd add that after seeing you speak and seeing some of your work online, you're clearly at home in this area, but there's a difference between seeming like you're at home and actually admitting, you know what, this is where I belong, this is what I'm going to do. How did that come about?
Well, first, thank you for acknowledging that I seem at home through my writing and my presentations. I appreciate that because it's true. My passion has grown over the past 19, 20 years. I'm now at a point where I want to figure out how I can continue to scale it.
Mm-hmm.
So you talked about the work I've done writing blogs and speaking opportunities. What are the additional opportunities to scale this? And so now I've written a book and I also have a new venture. Here's what this passion gives me through what I do. I get to live my life and also experience the lives of my ancestors on whose shoulders I stand and they inspire me. There's a myth out there that African Americans, people of African descent, whose ancestors were formerly enslaved, that they can't trace or really know their ancestry prior to, say, 1870
Mm-hmm.
because of slavery and the resulting lack of available documentation. And that's just simply not true. And so, as African Americans and people of African descent, I firmly believe that we can uncover our rich family histories. Now, with that said, we have to recognize that to do that, it takes some expertise navigating complex historical challenges, such as the complexities of slavery era records and finding your enslaved ancestors within them, and then also surname changes.
Mm-hmm.
But I would say I'm proof positive that that is very possible. I want to scale my passion and expertise and share it with the world so that people of African descent can know that they can trace and know and celebrate and preserve their family history. So last year, when I left AWS, I was gifted time really to think about how I could do that. And so I initiated a couple things. One, you mentioned I wrote a book. It's titled Finding Cornerstone Stories, Drawing Inspiration from Your Family History. And it's really a collection of inspirational family stories that I've uncovered in my own family tree as a series of chapters.
Mm-hmm.
And then at the end of each chapter, I provide a research tip to help the reader uncover a similar story within their own family tree. And so, in some degree, that book, when it's released, that scales my expertise to people who may want to do the research themselves. Then you have a lot of people who want to know their history but don't have the time or the desire to spend hours upon
Right,
hours
right.
researching like I do. That's where my new venture comes into play. I ended up launching a firm that can do that in-depth research for people of African descent. I've got the domain, the trademark, we built out a website. The company's called Black Ancestries. I've started to build a team of researchers. My first media mention for the company was back in May when the Washington Post interviewed me about the revelation that the first American Pope, Robert Prevost, was of African descent, and he had two Louisiana Creole grandparents, both of whom were listed as Black in the census in Louisiana. And then when they moved to your neck of the woods, Chicago, they started passing as white and they were classified as white. But one of the Pope's grandparents actually was born in Port-au-Prince, Haiti.
Wow.
So I did that interview as Andre Kearns, founder and CEO of Black Ancestries. And then we officially launched the venture on Juneteenth, where we announced our first client. Now we're up to close to a dozen clients, and we're moving right along.
Andre, I just have to add, hearing you talk about this, it's a new venture, but it sounds like a ministry.
Yes, that is a magical thing that I am enjoying. I think my whole life, my professional life, I've sought to be able to align my professional and personal passions. And I think that this venture embodies that. And so I am enjoying following my bliss.
Andre, let's talk about some of the things that are special to you about being among the ancestors through genealogy. What's the first thing that comes to mind for you as we talk about this?
This is a very personal passion and mission for me. I have a lot of people that ask me, why do you do this? Why do you spend so much time and effort researching your family? And I tell them, listen, I'm living this life that's given me a lot of amazing opportunities.
Mm-hmm.
But in parallel, I also get to experience the lives, the ups and downs, the challenges, the triumphs of my ancestors on whose shoulders I stand. And so there's a lot of value in that. It gives me perspective when I see what they went through, what they faced to build that legacy that now extends to me. It gives me great perspective and how to live my current life to the fullest and how I need to live.
Mm-hmm.
I enjoy the process of research. I have an analytical mind. I'm able to bring it to the research process. So my vein training and my MBA around problem solving helps there. I just get a lot of satisfaction solving puzzles, solving problems. So the added benefit here is when I solve a puzzle, a genealogy puzzle, not only do I get the satisfaction of solving it, but then I've got this gift of knowing a bit more about my family and therefore knowing a bit more about myself.
My aunt is
Yeah.
actually doing genealogical research on my dad's side of the family, and the records get spotty, but as she's uncovering things, it's like blowing us away. I think she's back 5 generations now, and seeing where we think our first Black ancestor was and how they were
Mm-hmm.
introduced into the family line has been really fascinating for me. What are some of the things you're learning about your family as you dig deeper into this?
I've traced my family back to really the first Africans to arrive in Virginia as early as 1619. And that has led to special experiences. So, for example, I visited the historical marker for where the first Africans arrived in Virginia. And so that was in Hampton, Virginia at Fort Monroe. That's an amazing experience and really a dream fulfilled, right? I
Mm-hmm.
talked about how roots allowed me to dream that one day perhaps I could trace back to ancestors born on the continent of Africa. Being able to do that was a dream fulfilled for me. I've also traced back my family to Revolutionary War patriots. A few years ago, I had the experience because of that to be inducted into the Washington, D.C. chapter of the Sons of the American Revolution. So that is, and then another example. I've traced my ancestors back to those who were enslaved on the Cedar Grove plantation in Huntersville, North Carolina, which is a suburb of Charlotte. And so I was invited to go back, and I say go back because my ancestors were there, but go for the first time
Mm-hmm.
for me physically and walk the grounds. And I was invited to give a lecture about my family. And so it was a really special experience to know that 205 years after my ancestors were enslaved there, that I would be invited back to go and tell their story and speak their names out loud and talk about how they built this place, a place that wanted to render them invisible and only valued them for the labor that they could provide. And I was able to tell the full story about them and upon emancipation, the emancipated, beautiful emancipated community that they built and the families that sprung from that, including me and my family.
I'm curious what it's like as you pull the thread and turn over the cards because my uncle, who has since passed away, once sent a photo of his grandfather, and I knew that my family's roots were from St. Croix to the Dominican Republic and the sugar plantations. And when I saw his grandfather, he was essentially a white Portuguese man.
Hmm.
And I immediately thought to myself, oh crap, did he own slaves? Like, is that what happened? Now, it turns out he was a sugar engineer or plantation engineer, so no. But there's always that moment where you're like, do I really want to know? Like, what happens when I pull this thread? What's attached to the other side of it? Do you have any of those moments as you're doing this?
Absolutely. This is not for the faint of heart. this research. For example, I talked about tracing my enslaved ancestors. I have come across many, many documents
Mm-hmm.
that have rendered and represented my ancestors as property and have associated and pegged dollar values to their lives.
Wow.
And so when I see those documents, I kind of cycle through the same range of emotions. It's sadness, it's red hot anger, and then if I give myself enough time, that sadness and anger turn into inspiration, that they had the strength to endure what they endured so that they could build a legacy that now extends to me. Anyone who's doing this research or wants to learn more about the family, they have to be ready to give themselves the emotional space to be able to process the things that get uncovered. But ultimately, as a family historian, I'm here to capture our full history as accurately as possible, the good, the bad, and the ugly. I kind of see my role as one where I am preserving the choice for future generations to know our history or not. If I don't capture it, it will be lost to history. Future generations won't have a choice to know it or not. If I do capture it and I do record it, they can choose not to read it, but it's there for a future person in my family who does literally want to know. And so that I feel is my responsibility.
Andre, thanks for sharing that. My aunt had traced our history in Central America as a family, and we think we found the first Black ancestor that we have. And it gets tricky because we don't know exactly how she ended up in Central America as a Black female, and we're not sure all of the circumstances around her progeny, which led to where we are today.
That's another thing, by the way. I think one of the things that's you will find African Americans in particular, and the Caribbean, anywhere where slavery was in practice, we of the diaspora look and are a little ethnically different than our African ancestors
Mm-hmm.
in that we have admixture from Europe,
Yep.
indigenous people, but a lot of that European admixture came because of the history of slavery, where you had free European men who, through forced sexual coercion with enslaved African women, had offspring.
Mm-hmm.
We're the byproducts of that, and so you can imagine over multiple generations, if that happens, you can have enslaved people who look present as white, but they're really not, right? When I was in South Africa, actually, it's interesting. Back when I was working at Bain, I was on this quest to connect with my African ancestry. And so every time I met a person who was ethnically Black in South Africa, Zulu, Xhosa, etc., I would ask them, like, so if I'm walking down the street, what tribe would you just assume that I
Mm-hmm.
was a member of?
Mm-hmm.
And they would say, you would be either considered Indian or Cape colored. And that was an interesting introduction into kind of perceptions and identity and
Right.
how you process your own history. And it was me realizing that because of my history as an African American and that admixture that happened during enslavement, that I look a little different, but I'm ethnically mixed in terms of what the DNA tests say, but my identity is 100% rooted in being a Black man. So it's complicated, and it changes based on where you live.
Andre, listeners know that I'm a storyteller. We even had one of the masters of storytelling, Lily B, on the podcast a few months ago. It's one thing to tell your ancestors' story, but you're doing more than that. How is this type of storytelling special for you? It's much more inclusive than what we grew up experiencing, as evidenced by your school project and the reaction that it got. But I want to understand a little bit more about the storytelling aspects of what you're doing and why that sort of puts you on this mission, or what I called earlier a ministry.
In some ways, I just feel that my ancestors are calling me to uncover their stories and share them with the world. My ancestors, our ancestors, built this country in a literal way. I think back to when I was working at Amazon and we were at a leadership offsite at Mount Vernon, which is the plantation of George Washington. And as part of our meetings, we took a break and we took a tour of Mount Vernon. The docent was talking about all the things that George Washington was doing as a father of our country to build the country. And at the same time, all the ways that the plantation had to be managed and the intricacies of successfully managing a productive plantation. And I remember a colleague looked at me and said, "Oh my goodness, how did George Washington manage to do all these things at the same time?" And I kind of chuckled because I knew the answer to that question. And I paused before I shared it with him, which is, well, he didn't really have to do anything on the plantation because he had hundreds of enslaved people that were
Right.
running the plantation and were doing all the heavy labor associated with the plantation and making it productive. But those people in our history, and even in the history that was told at Mount Vernon, were rendered invisible. It feels like in our current climate that we're actually taking steps back towards that.
Hmm.
And I want to fight that. Like, I fully embrace inclusive storytelling, that we have an opportunity to tell the full story of how this country was built and how we continue to progress toward this more perfect union. And so that's just really important to me. And I believe that genealogy empowers people to do just that, uncover the stories of their own ancestors, of their family, and to share it forward to the public so that it can be part of this broader narrative of how we understand our country's history.
As you talk with people, are you finding that some deliberately do not want to talk about their history because of the pain associated with it? And I mentioned earlier, some of the things you might learn might not be pleasant. But I think there are some families who deliberately don't talk about their history because of the pain associated with it. And we're not necessarily talking about, the 1700s. We're talking about history during the Civil Rights era or the early 1900s, where they're just ancestors or stories that they are trying to move on from by distancing themselves from them. What would you say to people that are in that camp of like, yeah, this sounds really interesting, but I don't want to know because I'm afraid of what I'd find?
I would say that we should have the courage to uncover and know our entire history, the good, bad, and the ugly. And there may be some pain in that. And so that's where you make sure to give yourself the emotional space to be
Okay.
dialed into your own emotions and how you're processing what you're learning, so that you're not doing it in a way that traumatizes yourself, right?
Right.
Otherwise, that's how history's lost. Yes, Black people have gone through some very painful things in this country. And part of the challenge of uncovering our history is that our ancestors didn't talk about it because it was so painful.
Right.
So if you don't talk about it and you don't pass it down, it could be lost.
Right.
And so I make it a point of interviewing family members, elders, my parents, my grandparents, aunts, uncles, anybody who's considered a family historian in the family, and gathering as much information as I possibly can to record that so that we preserve it. And then it's also knowing that ultimately, even though we may have experienced pain or gone through painful things,
Mm-hmm.
that we came out of it stronger. Our history as African Americans is one of applying agency to build, to seek justice, to seek equality. And I'm proud of that and I'm inspired by that. But you don't get to that story without going through the pain that people experience.
Andrew, when we were preparing for this, one of the things that you said was really special to you about being home among the ancestors was honestly the reactions you get from people as you're doing your research and sharing the stories of their ancestors with them. Can you share a little bit more with our listeners about what you mean by that and what your experience has been uncovering people's family stories?
Been really powerful. One of our first clients was Dr. Lewis W. Sullivan, former Health and Human Services Secretary, a luminary as a Morehouse man. His son hired Black Ancestries to uncover his family story.
Mm-hmm.
And so through that, we were able to trace back 5 generations, 3 through enslavement. And one of the questions Dr. Sullivan had was where his last name came from.
Right.
And we were able to uncover that for him. It was amazing for me because I got to create this report for Dr. Sullivan and then do a reveal session with him where we talked for like 2 hours. It
Wow.
was just, I was like floating on a cloud having this experience. But afterwards, his son, who had reached out to me to initiate the project, basically told me that to see his family's history that he never knew existed made him feel more complete, made him feel more connected to his country and to his lineage. And he said it stirred emotions in him that he didn't know existed, and that he literally felt like knowing this history was life changing. And that one example is the power of what Black Ancestries is providing its clients. And it gives me the motivation to continue to do what it is that I do.
Andre, we're just about at time, and as we wrap up, I want to give people a chance to hear from you where they can go to learn more about the work you're doing and where they should go, especially if they want to learn more about their family history. And I know there's some videos of you online and some other writings that you've done, so share away. How can people follow up on this conversation?
My company website is blackancestries.com. So that's Black Ancestries, plural ancestries. And that plural is intentional because we are part of an African diaspora. You mentioned descending from people from the United States and also the Caribbean,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Mm-hmm.
So your own family history is a perfect example of that. And my vision with this company is that we are the place for anyone who descends from the diaspora to come and know that we have the expertise to trace their family. So blackancestries.com. So if you go to our website, you'll learn more about our company, the vision that I just articulated, success stories from our clients, us in the media. I've got videos of my talks posted there. So it's really going to be a one-stop shop to
Great.
learn more about the company and what we can provide you. And then also, that's where you'll be able to sign up to be on the pre-order list for my book, Finding Cornerstone Stories.
Awesome. Well, Andre, thanks for making time today. I know when I first heard about this project, you were somebody that I wanted to have on to talk about this. And I know we waited a little bit to get it a little closer to the book release, but I'm eager to get it when it's out for the public.
Steve, thanks for the invitation. I appreciate our long friendship. I appreciate everything that you've done. And thanks for this opportunity.
Thanks for listening to this episode of My Home is Special. Be sure to subscribe to the podcast to get future episodes automatically. You can go to myhomeispecial.com to see the full project and sign up for email updates. Be sure to follow KBevPhoto on Instagram or go to kbevphoto.com to see what I'm snapping these days. There's a lot on both to explore. For now, this is Keith, aka KBev, signing off. Peace.